so that will prepare. Okay, and I'm hoping you can all just see my screen. So let me just make the screen a little bit bigger. Okay, and let's increase the size. Okay, so hopefully this is easy enough to read anyway. So okay, now scope, hoisting, and this are what I would call intermediate concepts within JavaScript, and it's not the easiest thing to wrap your head around. So I would say this: for anybody who struggled yesterday, just know that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're struggling. It doesn't mean that programming's not for you, for example. They're not easy concepts to understand at first. So I'm going to try and go through them a little bit. I'll just take a sip of water. I hope you're all staying hydrated as well, because that is super important. So, okay, so scope and this are concepts that kind of work together. So it's important to try and understand them both at the same time. Hoisting, on the other hand, is, in my opinion, I think people spend far too much time trying to understand what hoisting is and the impact of it. Really, the most important thing to know about hoisting is that sometimes things like hypothetically get moved to the top of your code when the code is run. So let me try to explain this with a little bit of code. So of course we're talking about scope. Now let's imagine that I've got some variables. Let's just say we've got let name equals Sunil, and we've got maybe another name equals let's have a look, Asaiya. Okay, so let's say we've got these names, and maybe we've also got, in fact, let's use var for these. So I imagine Pierrot hasn't spent time going through var, and that's because really we shouldn't be using it anymore, but it is something where scope has an impact. Let's see. Oh, I just noticed, Asaiya, you spelt your name in the chat. I got confused for a moment. I was thinking, wait, is it S-A-I? AA, but that would make no sense because it's not Asaya. Anyway, so let's say we've got a function here that is get name. And now let's say hi, and we're going to give it a parameter. And this parameter is also going to be name. You'll see I've got some squiggly lines here. It's basically because it's telling me don't use name because you've already called something name at the top, and it's going to get confusing. But this will still work. And I want to explain it in this way because it touches on another subject that Christy mentioned in a previous, in the Discord chat. So anyway, let's say we do return. We'll use our backticks and we'll say hello name. So okay, we've got three things here. We've got a function, and we've got these two variables. Now, as I mentioned, what happens is hypothetical. It doesn't literally happen, and I want to point this out because a lot of tutorials that you'll see online will tell you that the code actually does move. It gets hoisted to the top, but it doesn't literally get hoisted. It's just theoretically it happens. So Chantel, yeah, he told us why not to use var. Okay, that's good. And like I said, I'm only using it here for demonstrating something. Okay, so we've got this code. We've got all this code here. Now let's imagine that this is what the code looks like when it gets executed. Okay, now when we say executed, all we mean is the browser loading your file. So in this case, it's loading script.js. Now, if we look at our index.html, we see here on line 14, we've got this script.js. So kind of when we get to line 14, the browser is going to execute all of this code. I just want to make sure, can you all hear me okay? And you're all kind of following me so far? Okay, amazing, that's good. Okay, so now what we see on line 10 is hypothetical, okay? So what may happen is we end up with this. Let's just copy that. We end up with something like this. Oh, not again. There we go. Okay. So this seems strange. Okay. So, but what all it means is when we think about scoping, what happens is when the browser executes the code, what it does is because it has kind of inbuilt memory, which is not something we've spoken about. I don't think we've spoken about kind of space complexity, time complexity, memory, and things like this. These are kind of programming concepts in general, or even computer science concepts. But with JavaScript, it's slightly different. So this is almost specific to JavaScript. So sorry, I just saw something on the wall I had to get rid of. So what happens here is the browser makes space. It kind of thinks, okay, it looks at the code and thinks, okay, I can see that there are some variables, so I need to make some space for these variables. And what it does is it makes all of that space first. So it's kind of like this, where it creates some variables. It creates a function as well, because these all get hoisted to the top. But then the actual declarations happen afterwards. So it thinks, okay, I've made all this space for these variables and functions. Now I need to give them those values. So that's what happens. And when we have these variables that don't have values, you might know that they default to undefined. So it's almost like this. This is really what those values look like when they've not been assigned a value. So yeah, I hope that kind of makes sense so far. And really, the reason why we kind of think about this is because it's kind of a way of just understanding how the browser, what the browser does with the code. The reason why I guess we should think about it is this. It's just simply this. Don't use values of variables before they've been created. And what I mean by that is you wouldn't want to be in a situation like this, where you're trying to, say, assign a value to name and assign a value to another name, but you've not actually created those variables yet. So it's just that, really. So Asay says, it reminds me of C when you declare the type of variable first. Okay, yeah, interesting. So I don't really have much experience with C or any, really. If I think what you're saying is, are you talking about how kind of you do that with Java as well? Obviously separate. This is not JavaScript, but Java, where you would say what type it is. So, for example, instead of var name, if this was like this, then instead of var name, you might say string name or something like that. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So. Yeah, that's I guess that's one of the peculiar things about a language such as JavaScript, and it's the same with Python as well. yeah, you just kind of make the variable. You don't say, you don't make the string or make the number. They're the values that get assigned to the variable. Whereas, yes, in Java, or I guess in C, the variable is by default a type. And for some of you who may have heard of something like TypeScript, TypeScript was, or is, it's known as a superset of JavaScript. And it's basically an attempt to bring that kind of typing system to JavaScript. So, I mean, look, there's not really much else you need to know about hoisting, in my opinion, than that. The only lesson I would take from it is don't use, don't assign or try to use values before you've created those values. That's pretty much it. Things like let and const, what they do is they, again, theoretically, they kind of eliminate this thing where it kind of creates it creates the space or the variable first. What it does is instead it will just attempt to just make the variable and assign it at the same time. That's all. Okay, so that was scope. Before I move on, are there any questions about that? Anything that you're kind of not too sure about? So I don't see any responses from anybody. Cool. I say it, so far so good. Anybody else? Totally new thing. Okay. That's okay, Hafiz. I mean, it's these concepts, when I was starting out, they were I had no understanding of them. Like, I wish somebody was here to just kind of go through it in the same way that I'm doing now. So yeah, totally fine. Don't worry too much about it. And this is recording. So for Grace, who's just joined us, don't worry, you'll be able to catch up later today. But we've just covered the first topic, which in my opinion is the least important of the three. So let's look at hoist. I wrote scope at the top. I just realized it's not scope I was talking about. I'm so sorry. It was hoisting I was talking about. So, okay, so that's hoisting. Now let's look at scope and this. Okay, so scope, again, I think is a fairly straightforward topic. And what I mean by that is it's another topic that gets explained so much when really all you need to try and bear in mind is that functions have access to the outer scope. Okay, so I noticed Pierrot was talking about this, so hopefully some of this will make sense to anybody who was present yesterday. Typically, we have a global scope. Okay. Global scope is just the browser in this case. So you might have something such as the window object. Now, if I make a variable here, let's say name, and let's put Hafiz. So Hafiz, this variable belongs in the global scope. If I make another name, this also belongs in the global scope, because if you think of it yeah, Pierrot was doing kind of like the Russian doll as an explanation. So you've seen that. Let's try another one. So let's think of levels in a house, okay, or rooms and the house. So the global scope is kind of like the house. It's just the house. And inside the house, we've got Hafiz and we've got Chantel. So let's say person, another person. Okay, so we've got these now. let's make a function, and let's call this function room, and let's call it make room. Okay, and let's allow it to take a person. So let's say inside here, let's give this room a bed. Or let's say, okay, furniture. Let's say bed. Okay, so this is not in the global scope. Oh, can I make the code bigger? Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry about that. Let's get rid of that. And okay, hopefully that's a little bit better. Hopefully that's better. Amazing. Sorry about that, everybody. I made it a little bit bigger. You should have told me sooner. You're all too polite. You don't need to be polite with me. So here we've got so sorry, Hafiz is making me laugh now. So we've got furniture and we've got bed. Okay. I know that's not a very good variable, but we've got this bed. Now this is inside a function. Okay. So this is not in the global scope. This is the function scope. Okay. More specifically, this is the make room function scope. Okay. So this bed is not accessible outside of the room, okay, in this global scope. So, for example, if later on I decide to do console log furniture, this is not going to work. This will return, this will give some sort of error. I can't remember what type of error it is. It's not type error. It might be type error. But essentially, it will say, the variable doesn't exist. So that's kind of scope in that regard. Now, another thing we can do, though, is, in fact, let's just get rid of the parameter for the moment. But in here, I could do console log person if I wanted to. I could say, person is in furniture, which would return person is in wait one moment, I'm getting confused now. There we go. So we could do something like this. Person is in furniture. Would anybody like to guess in the chat, or even you can just speak if you want, what do you think this on console 9 would return? Like, what would it say? Okay, yeah, so Asaya says Hafiz is in bed. Exactly. So the reason, this is pretty straightforward. Again, it's Hafiz is in bed. We can kind of understand that. But what I want to point out here is that this function, make room, it kind of sits in the global scope, but of course, furniture doesn't. But a function has access to the scope outside of it. Okay. And likewise, in fact, let's go one step further, right? So let's inside this function, let's make another function inside of it, because you can do that. You can just put functions inside of functions, and there are reasons why you might want to do something like that, but we don't need to talk about it at the moment. But let's say we've got function in here, we've got go to bed. So, and here we put console log go to bed. Person. Okay. And then let's just say what we do at the end is we put return go to bed. So of course this on line 14 is still inside this function. Now, what do we think line 11 would return? Like what do we think would happen there? Go to bed, Hafiz. Well, let's just test it to be on. Like we'll get some verification. So let's open our browser and let's take a look in the console. One moment, I've lost you all. Oh, here you are. Okay, so let's see what we've got here. Oh, wait a minute. I've got an error because I still had that there. So that does just verify that one bit, though. We can see here on line 17, furniture is not defined. It's a reference error. That's what I meant to say. So this is a reference error. Okay, so let's just get rid of that. And okay, let's just refresh this. Let's call our function here. So let's go make room. I don't know if you can see that or not. Let me try and make that bigger. There we go. Hopefully that's a little bit easier to read. So let's call our function, and we can see here it says Hafiz is in bed because it used the first console log. Then it also says go to bed, Hafiz. Okay, so it's working, and what happens is that it's like that Russian doll that that Pierrot was talking about. An inner function has access to the values and everything outside of it, and it can keep going. So you can see here on line 11, it's using person, but person doesn't sit inside of make room. Like it's not being influenced by that. It's sitting all the way out in the global scope, but it still can access it. So the thing to bear in mind is that you can access things outwards. Like you can go outwards and still grab values, but you can't grab values from inside of something. So just like how we had when we tried to do console log furniture, this returns a reference error because we know that it exists, but it only exists inside the function. It's not in the global scope. So hopefully that kind of explains it a little bit. Now, one thing before we move on, I wanted to just mention is something that Christy had a query about a few days ago. It was this. I think it was this. It was what happens when we've got something like person here on line 4, but then we've also got person as a parameter, and it's got the exact same name. So in this instance, in fact, let's make it a little bit more interesting. In fact, you know what? We don't even need that. Let's just leave that as bed because we don't need this anymore. But we've got this function inside of a function. Yeah, in fact, before I talk about what I was doing, so I'll just explain the $sign. So the $sign is, well, let's look at what happened in our browser. So you can see here, it says, go to bed, Hafiz. So make room. Oh, actually, wait, it's because of that now. So basically, $sign is just saying it's just a way of being able to use a variable inside of a string. So there's two ways that we could have written this string. But the original way in JavaScript was to do it like this, where you use apostrophes or speech marks, and you'd write something like go to bed, and then you'd come out of the string, your plus symbol, and then write person. Okay, so this is the original way in JavaScript. Or we can think of this as pre-ES6 or pre-ES 2015. But nowadays, or more recently, exactly, yeah, Tali, so it's string concatenation. Whereas now, more recently, within the past 6 years, there is another way you can do it, which allows you to kind of write a string without having to use these plus symbols, because this can get a little bit messy if you wanted to write something like go to bed, Hafiz, you naughty boy. So if you had something like that, then all of a sudden you've got these plus symbols everywhere. But what you could do is just write it like this, and then you don't need those plus symbols, and you can just use the value like that. But the difference here, if you can see it, is that on line 10 we're using just like apostrophes, or you could also use speech marks if you wanted to. Whereas on line 9 we're using backticks. Okay, so it's BACK, so they're called backticks. And I'm not sure where they'll be on a Windows keyboard, but on a Mac keyboard, they're in the bottom. They're like here. It's this one right here. Yeah, exactly. So it's backticks, and you just kind of wrap the entire value inside of it, or the entire string. So, okay, going back to this. So what do we think would happen now where we've got our person on line 4, but on line 7, we're giving our function a parameter that is also called person. So on line 9, what do we think this would output? Would anybody like to take a guess? Like, what do they think person will return Hafiz?
Maybe.
Maybe. Okay. So, well, what this would do. Oh, hey, Pierrot.
Hello.
Apologies.
Oh, sorry. I didn't know that my cam was on.
Oh, no, it's all good. So, yeah, apologies. We're just running over a little bit.
Do we want to use this link for the lesson?
Yeah, you're more than welcome to. That's fine.
Yeah, let's use it. So I'm going to tell the people to start joining it if that sounds okay for you.
Yeah, of course. So, so yes, on line 9, we've got this. So let's take a look to see. Okay, so Ursula says, but you have to define the parameter first. Well, what we're doing here is, well, no, it's a good question. So, okay, so if let's take a look. So here on, if we do make room without a parameter, then it says go to bed, undefined, you naughty boy, which is interesting because we have person on line 4, but of course it's not using it because the function is expecting a parameter. So Aruthran, you're saying you can't see the screen. Yeah, I think it's just for you. So I don't know why that is, because I think I'm the main screen on here. Should be anyway. If you can't see me, just double click on my name or the S. So yes, so as we see, because it's expecting a parameter, it just returns undefined because that's its own scope. But if we then wrote make room and we put Hafiz in there, then we get go to bed, Hafiz, you naughty boy. So I hope that kind of explains a little bit of what the issue Christy had before when you were trying to understand about the two different things. Now, the only other thing we'll just briefly talk about is how this is impacted by it. So in the global scope, that has this or a this value. Let's just say global this. But then inside of our function, as we know, because the function has its own scope, this also has its own this. So we can say this is function this, or better yet, this is function make room this. So if I wanted to refer to this for some reason inside of that function, it's going to have its own version of it. So the reason why some people will end up using arrow functions instead is to just avoid the need for this. So if this, I'll try to stop saying this when I mean it in a different context. But let's say we had const make room like so. Oh, wait, sorry. Like so, then there is no longer a function, a make room function this. Instead, it's just global this again. So that's pretty much it, really. One thing I would say is, just like Tade did, if you want to understand more about this, just go and watch that video that we shared yesterday. It will go into slightly more complex situations because it will cover some things that Pierrot is going to cover in the future, namely things to do with what is known as object-oriented programming. But it's super interesting. But when you're building just general websites, it's unlikely you're going to ever need to concern yourself with things like this, things like really even hoisting and scope. They shouldn't really be too much of an issue. It's when you start to build software, like applications or games and things like that, that it will start to be something that you'll kind of need to pay more attention to. So before we kind of just wrap this bit up, did anybody have any questions?
I have one.
Mm-hmm.
Is this academic, right? Am I in the correct room? No, I'm joking.
So I'm guessing nobody has any questions.
I didn't follow the lesson, so I don't have any question.
No, that's all good. All good. So okay, cool. Well, in that case, let's wrap this up. Okay. Right. Let me. I'm going to stop this recording, and then we'll just start another one.